Longtime friend Jason Raznick, CEO of Benzinga, something he started in his basement and hey, made a few bucks off of later on. A year or two ago, it was like 300 million, not you personally, but sold it for $300 million or something like that, right?
Basically, yeah. And I just put on LinkedIn like 5 minutes ago. I was actually updating, I was posting this, executive chairman. So we brought on a person from Investors Business Daily, who was the president who led it when they sold to the Wall Street Journal network, Dow Jones, to become CEO. And I moved actually last month, but I just announced it today to executive chairman.
What does that mean? What does that title mean?
It's strategic direction, strategy, building product, hiring. So less of the having to do the day to day.
So
Less
that
of the
means that
operating.
yes, yeah,
Right.
you're like the CEO. No, you're not really the COO. You're like the big brain, like Bill Gates, right?
Yeah. Yes. Like Bill Gates.
Well, you're our Detroit Bill Gates, So anyway, I was with Jason last week for the NFL draft, or at least we were above it in a building looking down on it. I
What
never
do you
would have
think of
gone
it?
down that crowd. There was like 300,000 people packed into that square. It's amazing. Almost what, 800,000 people over 3 days?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like I didn't know what it was going to be like from starting from the get-go. And at our event, we had the NFL, we had sport business Titans event. Probably had 400 people or maybe more throughout the day. Supposed to have max 300. I think it ended up being 400. So about 10 or 15, no, 15 Michigan players hung out there all day. We had Paul
Wow.
Rosenberg, Eminem's manager, who was awesome. Just hearing how he discovered Eminem, the whole thing. It was really a cool day and really a cool few days. I mean, walking down the streets of Detroit, it was like felt like kind of like you're in New York. Just the streets were crowded, that whole thing.
No place to park. I mean, all the really good parking spots were closed because downtown, I've never been walking on Jefferson Avenue before. Well, I've crossed Jefferson Avenue, but I mean, everything was closed. I had parked 2 miles away and walked in, and I was one of the lucky ones because I got there early. So it was quite a crowd. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is I didn't
You got
realize.
some good steps that day, by the way.
Yeah. I think I got in 15,000 steps that day. So, one of the things I wanted to talk about was I was unaware that you guys also dabbled in sports coverage until you brought in all these sports folks. Talk a little bit about that.
I mean, we do a little bit. I just thought it was a good opportunity to do a lot more with the draft coming in. We've covered the business of sports, for a bit, like, sports gambling and just people betting on sports, just like the stock market. We want to be able to provide information in regards to, what's going on in the market, what's going on in sports. I like inspiring people and telling those stories of people who've, you know, did great things. And so that's kind of how we got into the sports and like the business behind it, I guess, was what I would say to you.
Hmm. Okay, what kind of coverage are you doing? Are you following the major leagues? Are you following college? Do you
No,
get into
it's
the
more
peripheral stuff?
it's more the business of sports, you know.
Okay, how do you define that?
So like sponsorship behind it, NIL, so college athletes, how do they what their next steps are, how like opportunities, business opportunities. So if Donovan Edwards is talking about, what he's doing in the business world now with NIL being so big, name, image, and likeness in college, we want to cover it. We want to cover changing things that are changing. And we believe people don't want to read it. So it's not necessarily covering, the next draft pick or what have you. We did cover more sports in general, like cool stats, gambling stats, but we're trying to cover things that are changing. So NIL is one of the things that's changing with college athletes. So we think it's important to try to, alert people on what's going on in those markets. And that's kind of how we define it. So when you have an event like we had, we were interviewing the manager, this guy Barry Klarberg, who's the manager of some of the biggest singers in the world and athletes. He's explained how they do their deals. Like if you're an aspiring investor and you want to learn about personal finance, I would argue that learning from people that have made a lot of money through athletics, hearing how they allocate their money or hearing how they use financial advisors and what advice they have and what they've been through, I think can be very beneficial.
I don't want to get on my soapbox, but it's amazing the college sports level, how that's changed since NIL came in. I mean, you couldn't even accept a hamburger from somebody in the old days. I won't allude to what coach I'm making reference to, and now it's like they're making millions of dollars. I mean, is it really amateur sports or is it semi-pro? What do we have with
No,
NIL?
it's minor league now, and there's free agency now too with the transfer portal in the NCAA
Oh,
where
hell
people
yes,
can move.
coach yells at you, you go to the transfer portal and say neener, neener, neener and leave. So I
Yeah,
think that's what drove Nick Saban out. He decided he didn't want to deal with it. So not to
yeah.
mention Michigan beat him in his last game, but that's neither here nor there, right? So
College sports is in a weird spot, that's for sure. I mean, the transfer portal makes it even in a more weird spot. I mean, just like you can just move out whenever you want, come back in. It's in a weird spot. I think college sports will go the route of being closer to being like pro sports. NIL is the solution right now, but how far away are we when the Supreme Court approves that that the college athletes can share in revenue of the university? And what that would mean is there's 110,000 seats for a Michigan game. Instead of having to go out there and go speak somewhere and get like a branding deal or what have you, college athletes, maybe they'll get $10 of every ticket sold from every Michigan game. That's $1 million per game that we split amongst the players. So the bigger get big. And I just see the Supreme Court going that route eventually.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting dichotomy.
Speaking of the bigger getting big, that's the one thing about it that worries me as a fan of some mid-major programs in both football and basketball. Somebody going to an Eastern or a Western, they're just not going to have the same opportunities, and I think the gap's going to grow even wider. Maybe they need their own division. Mid-majors do. I don't know.
It's true. I mean, that's going to be a real big change. There's so many changes going on in college. I mean, you look at Stephen Ross giving all this money to, Michigan athletics, but not to the NIL program. If he gave to the NIL, then it goes to the athletes. And I just don't know where this is all headed. I mean, it's really, but that's the point. I mean, it was cool to hear from Donovan Edwards and the founder of Champion Circle, Jared Wangler, hearing how his perspective and how Jared's, that's what was one of the panels. That's the point. Like, it's like, what's going to change? How is this going to alter? Now, having said that, Roger Goodell was talking about a positive thing from it. He was saying that college football players are staying longer in college, which he thinks that makes them more mature for the NFL. So they're not, there's a rule how many years you have to be or what age to go to the pros, and people are staying longer in college, which makes them more mature for the NFL. So there's some positive out of it. It's a change marketplace. So where we are from 3 years from now, honestly, we want to bring the information to people so they can potentially invest off it. If you knew that a small company is going to be instrumental in, getting college athletes paid, and it's a public company, how can you benefit off that? How can you invest in that trend? Do you invest in the Bud Lights of the world? Is there, I don't know, like there's just different things. You got to think of the derivative. We always talk about the derivative plays, like what are things you can do off that trend. So when electric cars were a thing, people were buying like Teslas, but for example, I was buying lithium stocks. I was like 3 years ahead of the average investor. I actually sold most of my lithium stocks a year and a half too early. So now they took off. I was like 5 years ahead on it. So those are kind of things why we want to cover that kind of stuff.